So today we have a really special guest, Jeff Dalton, who's the head of AI and chief scientist at Valence. He's also a professor of informatics at the University of Edinburgh. He is a world expert in conversational search and has been working on this for at least a decade in a lot of different contexts. He's leading the development work behind Nadia at Valence, which is a chat assistant that's intended for coaching and improving people within enterprises and their enterprise-specific contexts. With that, welcome to Jeff. You want to pop up, Jeff? Hi. So I thought I would start out by asking you a little bit about, sort of your history. You've been working on like conversational search and conversation in the search and AI space for a long time. Obviously the last 15 years have been like radical in the amount of change year to year. I thought you might want to talk a little bit about kind of what you focused on over that period at various places that you've worked, and how dramatic these changes are and what you've seen happen, how that's changed the landscape.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. So a little bit about me, my background. I actually started my career in search. So after I graduated, I worked at a startup search engine. Back then, this was almost 20 years ago now, so it tells you how old I am. But I went and I studied it in research. And so my background straddles that intersection of research and industry. And I kind of bounce back and forth to making sure that we're working on important things. We're at the cutting edge of the frontier, and we're also making that out and getting that to people. So when I did my PhD was in search, we were working on knowledge graphs. How do we make knowledge graphs accessible to search engines? How do we make that really useful for people? Then when I got that, I went and worked for Google. Surprisingly enough, I worked on health search there at Google. And what we really realized was that the search box wasn't enough. We had to shift from, this is a conversation with a state about the user. So we moving over to working on the Google Assistant, having conversational systems that could start to do that. But they were really basic, right? We could turn the lights off and on, play some songs, but what we really needed was a health kind of virtual assistant that was conversational. So that was motivating my work. But how that relates to search was we wanted to have that conversational assistant be able to do work on hard research problems. So research your health need, research the complex information needs. So that's why I'm going back and kind of have built a research lab around conversational search assistants. So we worked on building evaluation benchmarks because they didn't exist. For example, I built some of the first evaluation benchmarks for conversational search with partners at Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon, the Trek conversational assistance track way back in 2018, 2019, ancient history now in these days. And what we started to realize was at the time, it was really hard with the language and the evaluation tools that we had, kind of traditional NLP pipelines. And we really noticed a shift with GPT-2. Things that we thought were going to be hard suddenly became really easy and were solved within 6 months or a year. So we continually up-bar some of those really hard benchmarks. Hard hand-curated human data is still really fundamental. And so we continue to make actually really difficult, challenging benchmarks that still hold up today, even with state-of-the-art large language models. And now, currently, what the research is moving into personalization, tool use, and agents, and deep research agents is kind of some of the kind of frontier of what we're working on in the lab.
That's great intro. I think before we dive into agents, I'm curious, just some things have so dramatically changed that it might sort of beg the question of whether we just throw the old stuff out, or there's also a philosophy that actually the old stuff really sort of methodologies, measurement techniques kind of undergird best practice today. I'm kind of curious where you come down on that split. It's like some stuff must be dramatically easier, but at least in my experience, I've found that simple is often still king, and best practices don't change a lot. Do you have a different perspective on that?
Yeah, I think I'll break it up into two pieces. First, it's like a little bit of background, on what I think about it, and then also how we make that practical. So stepping back for a minute, there's a whole subfield of agents and agent systems. It's been around since the 1970s, right? It's really fundamental work. Everyone uses the word agent, but they often mean different things, and the word becomes very blurry. So if we go back for I want to really be real precise there. It's like, if you go back to the textbook, Peter Norvig textbook, and others, kind of AI 101, we have an agent that can plan, it can take actions, it can observe the environment, and maintain state, it has a representation of the world state, and it can change over time. So those are kind of what the fundamentals of an agent are, and those haven't changed for 50 years, really, fundamentally. What's changed is how we implement them, what's changed is like the state representation, the fact that they're now operating in language rather than in small kind of almost like finite state trees, right? So we still need to have those fundamentals. We need to know that background in order to know where because those patterns that we had with the early systems are going to continue are going to recur. So we need to know our history. We need to know the fundamentals in computer science so that when we start moving to multi-agent systems, we have lots of algorithms for this. We know there's a whole subfield of computer science that we need to make sure that we are using that history and use the learnings that we have from it. That's part of part one. Part two is, what does it actually mean? What hasn't changed? And what hasn't changed for me is the fact that we still have to have humans in the loop. We still have to have humans looking at the data. I always tell my grad students, look at the data, look at the data, look at the data. Now I tell my agents the same thing. Look at the data, stop, look at the data, go line by line. Have you looked at it yourself? How are things working? These systems are very complex. So you have to actually look at fundamental behavior. Can you do the task that you're trying to ask the agent? How hard is it? So trying to do some of those things yourself, starting really simple, and also just having good human evals. So LLM as a judge is great. Everyone is using them. They provide scale. But have you opened up the file? Have you labeled some data yourself? How can you do it? So those are just really simple fundamentals that aren't going away, that are just becoming even more important as we move forward with the complexity of these systems.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to sort of, I don't know, understate the importance of like, look at 10 examples with your own eyes.
Yeah.
When people, you run tons of data, thousands of examples, but what you learn with your human brain on, 10 examples kind of gets you to 90% confidence if you can kind of spot what's going on. Oftentimes you can save a lot of effort by just applying your primate brain to a few examples that we've all been so in our domain of expertise, that evolution and our lived experience has provided us.
One of the common mistakes people really often make, and grad students make, and I've made in the past, is that we think, oh, I need lots of data. I need huge amounts of data. I'm going to run a massive experiment with thousands or tens of thousands of things. And you're like, well, yeah, sometimes you need that. But sometimes, like, start small, start simple, go find the cases that are going to be hard, find the cases that are going to cause errors, and make sure that those are the ones that you're looking at first. And that almost like it's like a test first, data first, hard case first kind of philosophy. But starting small and start simple, so that you can look at it and understand the behavior.
Yeah, 100%. I think those are wise words to everybody out there.
Hard lessons.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, I don't know, how we think about agents today? I think you spoke a little sort of abstractly about like sort of the definition of the agent, but, I think that there's, people build things like, there's, we have RAG, we have MCP that's connecting everything together. We have different ways of managing state. I don't know. How do you sort of characterize the landscape of technologies that people are sort of using right now to kind of construct agents? It does go beyond the model. The models are changing in lots of important ways also. But maybe you could paint a little picture around the agentic landscape, and maybe how, I think that different guests that I've had have framed this slightly different ways. I'm sort of curious about how you think about what technologies are involved and what parts are responsible for what, and what changes have, made any of this possible with large language models.
Yeah. So let's step back just for a minute to talk about also where we've come from and how things
please.
And things are changing just so rapidly as well. But stepping back a little bit, things really started with deep learning, right? So starting with kind of non-generative systems, things that classify kind of deep neural networks, and those were super successful and ones with data at scale. And then we started moving into the GPTs. We started moving into the generative AI world, just the simple pre-trained foundation models that can generate language really well. And those were extremely powerful. And then we started instruction tuning. So now they can follow instructions. And then we realized, okay, but that's not enough. So now we're going to need to add tools so they can call and use calculators, and we now have as part of our post-training mechanism after the model's been pre-trained, it can now learn to use these tools at the right time and at the right place. And these models are now, they would sometimes call it distributed models. So there are architectures there that are like mixture of experts. And so under the hood, you're getting routed to an internal expert that can then work on answering your question. So that's there's a lot there that's been evolving in the core foundation layer. And those that actually starting to get a little bit blurry, because some of those kind of core elements of like, oh, it can call tools now. Oh, it can remember these things. We can add some additional adapter layer that has some additional memory. We can have specialized components, and those starting to make those underlying foundation models start to feel a little bit closer to agents, even though they're not quite there. And now with as we've seen with the latest models, like things like the next step was the reasoning models. Starting with the O series of models, right? So they now can have like reflective self-talk, where they're talking to themselves effectively, not necessarily reasoning per se, but kind of reflective talk back and forth with each other. And that's going to continue to evolve. I think we're going to continue to see some really significant advances over the next year or two on that, particularly with how they incorporate memory and other system components. And I think the shift that we're seeing is that we go from that foundation model to kind of first agents to now we're moving to agentic systems. So now we're in the lane of cloud code, which is really not just single agent, but it's a multi-agent system with multiple different kind of components that work together to help a user accomplish complex tasks. And that's also what we're building at Valence. When we're building an AI coach, we're building an agentic system that is helping people for coaching.
I think that this point about, when I was just thinking, I'm just responding kind of off the cuff to like mixture of experts as like what is the, what's the distinction between the model and the scaffolding, right? Like by the time you're talking about models that have kind of, I don't know, internal disaggregation or sparsity to them, I think it's a really interesting time when there is orchestration happening at lots of different layers, kind of within the model, and then people are talking about harnesses and talking about orchestration and then interconnecting these things. I don't know that. Well, it's all to say it's evolving quickly. What else do I want to say here? Let's talk. I don't know if you want to jump into talking about Nadia and what you're doing at Valence and why that's a particularly interesting problem, given like where you're coming from.
Yeah, that'd be
You want to jump into that? Tell us who Nadia is.
Yeah, so I'm head of AI at Valence. We're building an AI coach. And what really is exciting and kind of some of the key differences there is that it is an assistant. It can help people. But the goal of what we're trying to build with Nadia is that we're trying to build a coach. And the goal of the coach is to improve your performance over time. And that's fundamentally different from what an assistant is, which is just trying to help you draft an email or do something, do a simple task. Our goal is transformation for you, your organization, your team, so that you're improving your performance working with you. That's helping you be a better person. That's augmenting you. That's giving you what you need to do to be able to improve. So that the objective function there is not just did we complete your task, but did we help you learn and grow through that process? And so that's fundamentally different. So we're optimizing for value over time. Like, how is this getting for you over time? Is that getting to know you? Is it personalized for you? And are we also introducing productive friction? So are we stopping you from writing that email and saying like, oh, maybe that shouldn't be an email. Maybe you should go talk to that person. Or maybe you should do something else. And right. So by the way, you've sent other emails in the past and they haven't been successful. And also you've been talking and this history, you have communication issues. Let's make sure that we work on those. So that's what we're building, the future of an AI coach that can work with you, that helps you in your flow of work and helps you kind of get things done, but also helps you grow and improve for you and your team. So it kind of moving towards just an AI chatbot to actually, it knows your world. It knows it's connected to your organization. It has your organizational values. It's learned and grown with you over time. It knows your personality, your profile, how you work and how you work with others, so that it can really kind of coach you and do a better job than, because it's highly specialized for you and for your environment.
Yeah, I hear a lot of things in there that I think are potentially technically challenging. Like, I think the degree of personalization, to you, to your org. I think the time horizon, how are you successful in the long term when, like you said, the objective function is maybe harder to quantify when it's not directly observable in kind of little chunks. I could see something like LLM as a judge struggling a little bit to provide a meaningful metric on sort of, conversation turns or even task, trace level kind of task completion. Maybe you could say a little bit more about sort of how you think about that problem and what differentiates it from, what we can do with, a Claude or a ChatGPT with a little bit of prompting, a clever system prompt and some, sort of simplistic memory mechanism. Where's the meat of this?
Yeah. So there's a few different pillars we have here. So first, I think it's purpose built to be a coach. So it's built, we have human coaches on staff. We have human coaching knowledge and best practices are encoded within it. And so you're getting a kind of leading edge kind of coaching abilities, kind of that are grounded in fundamental principles that are there to facilitate growth in judgment and better actions over time. Then what we really have is like, memory is a really first class object for us. Right? So if we're going to learn and grow with you over time, we have to make sure that are we remembering the right things? We're looking at the past conversations. We're analyzing patterns in those. We're then making sure that we have the memory, so that you're talking about the same people. So we know your people. We know that it's not just Josh. We know it's this Josh, right? That is there. So we've done kind of co-reference resolution and understanding. And we give you control of that. You can see it. You can edit the people. Oh, that's the wrong Josh. So you have control over that. So those are all built into the product. That's because part of the product experience. End to end, not just in the models in terms of what we have for context, but it's about transparency and control for the user to see, this is what we know about you. This is what we're learning. These are the growth areas that we have for you. Which ones do you want to work on now? And giving you those choices in that process. What we call, what makes kind of Nadia a little bit element there is what we call it like the intelligence layer. So that's, the intelligence to be able to take those past histories and be able to have a coaching lens for what we think the patterns are going to be, the hypotheses that we have for the future. But also that coaching intelligence at the right time in the flow of the conversation. When do we pull in memory? Have you mentioned Josh? Oh, by the way, we're going to go pull in the connections and pull in the relevant kind of retrieval parts of the conversation that are relevant to you right now. And be able to have that also be, we know this information about Josh. This is the way he works. This is the way I work. These are the failure modes that we could be experiencing. And so having that integrated into the kind of coaching knowledge as like kind of a fundamental pillar or how we work and how these people in the team should work together. As well as obviously per Nadia, it's about, it's for an organization. So it's operating within the organizational constraints. It's operating with the safety that the organization has. We can talk about it, but one of the fundamental things that we have is our guardrails and a safety system. So we want the coaching that we have to be safe and tailored for you and for your organization. I mean, feel free to see where you want to go next.
Oh yeah. I think I want to go to measurement. I think when you raised my eyebrows when you were talking about sort of objective functions, right? When you are building something that, it's easy to pull a chatbot off the shelf now. It's remarkably easy to build something that has some basic utility. Much like the previous conversation about like not jumping to analyzing 10,000 data points when you can get a whole lot out of 10 of them. You also don't want to build a whole lot of apparatus, a whole lot of scaffolding when the delta there in performance is, doesn't support the investment, right? You want to spend your energy where it's most impactful. And I know, from a fiddler perspective, we think a lot about how we support our enterprise customers with, our kind of 3 pillars, or kind of production observability and guardrailing and evals, experiments, experience. We put a lot of sort of emphasis behind measurement as an important way of, identifying how well variant B is from variant A. Can you justify building out something more sophisticated? Also, where are the hotspots? What are common failure modes? Maybe you want to talk a little bit about, like, I guess I would really love to hear from you about, what your perspective is on measurements and what kinds of, whether it's evals or human labeling or, any of those things. How do you determine, where the leverage is in improving your system? I guess it all goes back to, like, what's the objective function you're trying to optimize? So maybe you start there, like, what are some of your objective functions?
Well, I think I'll talk about objective functions maybe second. Maybe first, I can tell you a little bit about how we very consciously have built our system to be eval first, right? And be evaluatable. So for example, if people start out, if they're building an agent system and they're building kind of, maybe they have some different prompts for different parts of the system, you might start out with just some very simple prompts. So like, do this, learn natural language, and that's great. And that's a first version. And that's where we started with the first version of Navia, for example. But what we found was, how do we trace it? How do we understand the behavior? What's going on? And so we actually, our approach is actually much closer to code. So it's closer to the prompts as code, where they're really kind of semi-structured objects. And so that allows us to say, like, we're taking an approach here. We are in grow coaching mode, so that we know, and here's the set of instructions that we know that we're in grow. And it has clearly defined steps and phases that we can walk through, so we can inspect those. So we take kind of a structured approach to the conversation. So it's not just open-ended. We have kind of playbooks, kind of coaching approaches and playbooks that we're executing. And because we're executing kind of these kind of structured coaching programs that we can switch on and transform over the kind of on the fly, what that allows us to do is to basically see, like, oh, we're executing instructions 1 and 3 in grow. And so when something goes wrong, we can trace that back to, like, oh, we need to go modify these lines of the prompt, right? In order to be able to make things work. So that's an element of, like, determinism. We can say, like, should this be in G or should it be in R? So we can then evaluate offline with humans on labeled data sets, like if coaching is flowing as expected. So when we go to a model upgrade, we can say, okay, the model is still transitioning at the right times, or, oh, something is stuck. You get stuck in G and we're not progressing. There's something broken here. So we have internal thinking and traceability from the model to be able to see what is actually, then we have our own proprietary kind of thinking model that we have to be able to, for those structured programs. And I think that's really kind of fundamental to make sure that you have those traces. So I'm really a fan of, like, what you're doing with your work there. I do want to step back a little bit for talking about some of the objective function. Mm-hmm. What for us is a little bit more difficult. So some of the things, if you're drafting email, that's fine. You can kind of measure that. But kind of best practice and kind of science-based approaches for evaluating the systems is based on rubrics, grading things with clearly defined measurement benchmarks. So we just say, coach, you can grade a coach. You can grade a coaching conversation with rubric. This goes back to kind of teaching first principles. As a professor, right, we have grading rubrics for when we grade papers, when we grade exams. We start with a rubric first. So for example, we have our kind of rubric pillars. I can share a little bit about them. We look at things like coaching as an explicit pillar. How good was the coaching in this conversation across different elements of coaching? Did we facilitate change? Was a person forced? Did they learn new things from coaching about the world and about themselves? For example, as one of those elements. We also have, how is the flow of the conversation, right? Did it proceed as expected? And of course, kind of user satisfaction intent, right? It's kind of cross those dimensions, and we can obviously dig into what those are, but those are kind of some of those elements and kind of pillars of being able to evaluate a really subjective system. And that's where it takes kind of trained, calibrated humans. We spend a lot of time calibrating our coaches so that when on those rubrics and aligning people so that we're getting clear signal. Because the worst part is, again, what's worse than having no evaluation? Having bad evaluation. Because then you're measuring the wrong thing and you're moving in the wrong direction. You don't know if you're actually improving. That's a really common failure case I see and experienced personally as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super, super interesting. How do you think, so one thing that we think about a lot with our customers is, I don't know, I guess I call it sort of aggregate and anecdote. So, things like aggregate metrics, you can measure across, you can sample, you can measure across, you can get a general tendency for performance along some parameter that you care about. You measure it in some way, you define some sort of, figure of merit, some sort of metric that is, or some set of metrics that you want to observe over time, and you certainly want to know if there are significant deviations over time. That means something is awry. Usually something has changed in the world. People are asking some sort of new question that corresponds to some new event. Probably you guys end up having some experiences where, I could imagine, world events or local events could push your models to have conversations in regimes that they were never specifically tested in.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other end, I'll give you one. Well, the anecdote is the other piece. I'm sorry, I don't mean to overload your the stack with thoughts, but it's also like, I think the other piece that I think about is like, how do you catch the dangerous rare corner cases? And I think that piece is a little tougher from sort of sampling, and I wouldn't quite know how to. You need some sort of probably a mechanism to identify those before you can give them to your high quality human labeler. I'm a huge fan of the getting humans to actually label stuff. I love the idea of calibrating your coaches on real human expertise. Yeah, so I'm not sure quite what the question was in there, except that I was going to try to press you a little bit on how you get at the sort of tricky corner cases that may not show up so much in a random sample, right? Those might be high stakes corner cases, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll start a little bit about some of what maybe I'll share a few anecdotes. For example, on kind of where things are challenging. So safety is fundamental. We have guardrail systems that we build, and then we're constantly onboarding new clients. And new clients are joining every day. And one of those clients is a large legal firm. And guess what? We have legal guardrails to not give legal advice. But when people then start uploading their docs and like, help me coach about this document, are triggered our legal guardrails saying I can't give you legal advice. And that was like, we saw that in our logs, and we're like, okay, now we have to go back and quickly revisit what the definition of legal advice means and what that means for this client. So making sure that things are both safe in the general, but also customized there to be able to address some of those, not just edge cases, but real domain shifts in terms of where things are being deployed and being able to see those issues. So more for medical advice, when we roll out to a health company, we have the same issues, right? So we see those, we can anticipate some of them, but then we hit real users, and the real users are messy, and real use is messy. And that's part of the fun kind of challenge that keeps us excited to be able to make these assistants kind of scalable for people over time. But you mentioned, for example, we're a coach. And so you can imagine there were some elections recently. And then we saw after those elections, people came in, they're like, I'm depressed. And whether they're on one side or the other, you have reactions to those. And like, how do we handle that in a way that's tactful, thoughtful, that doesn't just lock on a political guardrail, but that still allows us to like respond to your emotions while still maintaining our neutrality, and kind of in a very careful way. So that's some anecdotes from the front lines, from seeing some challenging situations there. The other kind of your kind of second question there is, how do you find those edge cases? How do you see it? And one things there is that's where, again, having LLMs kind of run as judges, looking for those kind of edge cases, anomalies where things were working. We sample failures. So we oversample cases where we have low, what that LLM thinks is a low quality conversation, and then kind of prioritize those for anonymized review, and kind of sampling in privacy preserving ways.
Yeah, that's great. That's really interesting. I think you touched on something that I think is I think relevant for both of us, which is the challenges associated with the general versus the specific, right? Like if you are able to roll out a guardrail model that is specific to a certain constraint in, for legal customers or for healthcare, even there, the domain is reasonably broad, that it's not straightforward. I think one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and is sort of a major challenge for my team that's developing sort of fairly general purpose guardrail models, is how do you deal with the dramatic differences between domains. I think there's a really interesting set of trade-offs around, I think for probably many of our listeners here, right? Like, where is the right place to draw the balance for their particular use case? I mean, not everyone is a startup who gets to, focus on, one kind of, coaching as a focus. I suspect we have, audience members who are, overseeing 15 different applications across, some financial services organization. And, it's probably not a good use of resources or practical to totally dial in customization for every single one of those use cases down, like how much can you repurpose from off the shelf where there's some, expertise that's, baked into doing a pretty good job at a thing versus some of the benefits you get out of the very specific purpose-built thing. I think, one of the things that I think sounds appealing about your role is you do really get to focus on this particular use case and generate some sort of bespoke solutions to the kinds of problems that you have. Maybe I don't know, do you have any sort of advice you would give to the kind of spectrum of people out there operating in different orgs about, when it's a good idea to go kind of whole hog into investing in, bespoke parts of an agentic system versus taking something that's much more off the shelf and a common design pattern?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to start. I have a couple thoughts there. One of the first challenges: do you have actually clear requirements? Do you have a clear spec for what things need to do? Do you have some sample conversations, some sample use cases? People maybe might rush to like, oh, I'm going to make a prompt. We're like, whoa, stop. Before you write the prompt, what are you trying to do? Do you have some data, that those 5-10 examples at least, kind of for that, to be able to know, at least have a sanity check if these are working? So if you can't measure it, how do you know if it's working or not? I mean, so you need to have some data for that to be able to have some samples. Now, the issue there is that the data is different when you actually deploy it, and then you actually have. But these are actually kind of standard known issues that if you go back to machine learning, we had model drift, and there's kind of just playbooks on how you basically make sure that your models are performing, and that's kind of standard practice. You can look at some of the literature from Google and others who have been deploying ML models at scale across, and many of your listeners are doing the same thing. So it's making sure that you're running those same playbooks and running it with your agentic system. So that's something that hasn't changed very much. We just have to make sure that we actually do it in these cases. I will say that for something like safety or guardrails, you might start with something off the shelf to begin with and see how it works. We started with like what was the simplest possible version that we could have as a first version as well, and built some of those ourselves. And we continue to build those ourselves because some of that's our business value and it really matters to us. So that's as a safety feature, right, for our users. So if it really matters to you, then you should own it and build it. If it's just something that you need to have, that's just, that's just there, then go buy it and, take something that kind of more off the shelf. But I think from experience, what I would have seen is quickly you hit issues of, it doesn't quite work the way I want it to, then I have to adapt it. And if it's a big complex framework that's been built around it, then it's a lot harder to change and be able to get that behavior that you're looking for.
Gotcha. Yeah. Great points. I think that, even within our users, while we try to provide some set of stuff that mostly, works out of the box to provide some sort of general coverage, basic safety coverage and observability, some general purpose guardrails, that's fine for some applications. There are certain fairly standard things that we see that could be improved, but are kind of at some reasonable level of quality with the basic stuff. But, one of the nice things about, our product and the team I get to work with here is that, we have a whole, customer success team that's really good at helping our users sort of adapt our product to the particular applications that the customers bring. So some of it is, custom metrics, being able to throw, calculations of interest from a business perspective up onto a dashboard, or, customizable LLM as a judge that runs an automation at scale so that, the specific thing that is important to your use case, at least you have the model's not always the best, but, in aggregate, you have a good proxy for how performance might be changing with time and stuff like that. And
we certainly, and I really appreciate that. I think that's fundamental to making these systems successful. And for example, when we roll out Nadia to a new customer, there's a lot of customization that goes into that. So making sure that we're curating the right knowledge that Nadia knows about you and your organization and how you work and your terminology and your phrasing, having the pilot so that we can see that. And then what customization needs to be done next? Do you need a custom workflow for feedback? Do you need that custom, the kind of custom role play, for example, in terms of what you want to role play with your coach and how you approach role play? So those are kind of key things that we want to make sure that, for example, for a coach, that we're clear in adding significant value. And I think that's one thing why a specialized coaching solution like Nadia and Valence really kind of beats copilots and other kind of more generic solutions.
Yeah, totally. I can totally imagine that. How do you think about privacy? I mean, you're bringing up this concept of all these private conversations with various kinds of role play, and presumably there's, some sort of org level structure, org level customization that has some interplay between private conversations and, org level oversight.
Yes.
Is this?
So I think organizations can divide their customer guardrails and safety in terms of what people can talk about. They can seed it with organizational knowledge that's important for the company, that's there, that's there. They can have some tool calls to look up other parts of knowledge to be able to interact for the key things. But then a really kind of fundamental first principle for us is that your chats are your chats, privacy. That no one can see those, right? That they're yours. And that's a fundamental building block of coaching is trust. And that you have to be able to trust the coach, because you're going to be emotionally vulnerable. You're going to say, I'm struggling with this, and this is hard, and I'm having these people problems. And that level of trust and transparency is really fundamental to growth in terms of being able to make things possible. So that is really just a fundamental pillar that we've built kind of baked into the product from the beginning. And also control and transparency. So it's you can go and you can delete chats, you can delete insights that the coaches learned about you, and you have full control over that, and not your organization, right? Also the ability, for example, for you to share very clearly with other people on your team. So one of the key things is if we want to move from just coaching for me to coaching to a team, and we're moving in general, these agents are going to start working together. They're going to have to share information somehow with each other. So in Nadia, we allow you to share information about yourself publicly, and you control your kind of public profile of yourself. So your work profile. So you might be willing to share your personality profile. You might be willing to share information about some of your calendar, share information about how to work best with you, that then another Nadia can kind of come and read and have access to, and be able to see that information and be able to then use that to be able to customize the coaching. So that kind of fundamental transparency around what's being shared, how it's being shared in a way that you control very clearly is really important. And I think will continue to be important for the entire industry when as these systems become more complex and we're increasingly sharing information.
Yeah, I think on the side, I've tinkered around with memory systems a little bit. I think the idea, at least a few times, has crossed my mind that we're likely entering a world just where we have agentic assistants that are working for us that have access to a variety of privileged knowledge about our own experiences and about our families. They're useful to us when we can share the specifics of our lives in a personal way with them, but we're also already using them to make reservations on the phone to restaurants. And, if we're not already letting our agents talk to other people's agents, it's going to be next week, right? I think it's a really interesting question about how we federate knowledge in a way that's sort of deterministically enforceable versus just sort of fallibly tuned into the model. If you follow what I'm trying to say, I don't think we've begun to solve that problem yet.
It reminds me, I think we're going to need to do some research here. It's going to take a little bit of evolution. There's going to be a future of, this is my knowledge and how do I share this and make this available with not just with multiple agents in ways that have clear scope for where and how they can be used and how they can be shared. If they're remembered or whether they have to be forgotten. So you can use this to make that reservation, but then don't remember that I hate Thai food otherwise. They use that fact, right? I actually love Thai food. But whatever that user's preference is, right? If you look at some of these standards are starting to emerge. It reminds me, there was some work from Tim Berners-Lee, founder of the World Wide Web, kind of looking at, privacy is going to be fundamental. We need it. We are going to need some new foundational layers and standards that are being built for people's knowledge and personal knowledge bases. And that's going to be increasingly important when we're moving into the agents having those knowledge stores and being able to take them out, to be able to control them. I want to share them with a different agent as well. How to make those portable. There's not clear standards for that today. And it's something that's going to be increasingly important, but I don't have a good solution for you today, but it's a really important problem.
So I think
it's hard to go working on it.
One thing really interesting that you raised that's worth highlighting is the degree to which it sounds like Nadia is sort of a synthesis, some sort of hybrid of being large language model and being some deterministic scaffolding around tasks and sort of structured explorations that are designed by experts, right? I think one pitfall is maybe sort of giving too much freedom to the task pursuing agent in every scenario. Do you think that providing sort of I'm going to call it semi-deterministic structure, right? Guiding the language model with specific prompts that follow a schedule, that sort of, I don't know if there's a good name for that sort of paradigm of, deliberately trying to guide the model, along something that's a little bit more of a deterministic state machine. But it seems to me that,
I can dive in a little bit there.
Sure.
There's a long history in dialogue systems. Like SigDial has been around a long time. We've learned a lot about how conversational systems work. And your past listeners have heard people talking about some classic dialogue systems. We had finite state machines. We have dialogue trees. If you've ever, called a phone, you've used the dialogue tree.
Sure.
So you can go step by step. We also then we moved the dialogue systems evolved to frame-based models, which moved to like slots and values. And you're like, I just need to make sure that these things get filled. I don't care the order you do them in. So now that gave the system the flexibility to get multiple pieces of information in the same turn, for example, from the user. And we're continuing to move. And now it's larger that we know we're building an artifact with the user. And so we have to basically, we're not just, it's not just, there's a clear outcome that we're trying to achieve, whether it's a coaching plan or whether it's that a user is committed to, or whether there's an email that's getting written. There's an actual outcome that's being drafted with the agent in the loop. And you can measure progress and what's complete and what's not complete against that. And so you can still have an LM kind of following a structured process to be able to know. And if I think about how we think about Nadia, we started really, really simple. We started with a single, we didn't start with a complex multi-agent system. We started with a kind of a single threaded agent that was kind of working, that would then had different kind of workflows with code to be able to pull in things like different parts of memory at the right time. And that's kind of controlled deterministically with code and different kind of prompt gates and models that we have. We can clearly see and inspect what that workflow is working, whether it's working, how it's working, and be able to make changes. And now it's pretty easy to change code. So if we want to evolve that system, we can change those rules and make them more flexible and have them be in code. And where it makes sense, pull things out into sub-agents where they're appropriate.
I love this, Jeff. I think that, so it sounds like you come down somewhere with respect to kind of federating memory. It sounds like you see a lot of utility in this kind of deterministic state machine management of user state.
Yeah, because you don't need all memory at everything at all times, right? We now have large language models that have pretty huge context windows, massive context windows, millions of tokens. We can fit entire books inside of a context window. So it's about what information do we need to have all the time? What information do we need to have some of the time and be able to have relevance? And so again, I have a search background, so I always think in the concept of like what piece of information was relevant for right now. And if I give you this information, are you using it to materially change the output in the system? So there's obviously citations and elements that we have that we know we cited different information, that we use different pieces of information. You can track that and see, and okay, we always had this information here. It was never used in any of the outputs. So do we need it? No, we can prune that from our context windows and put something else in that's valuable instead, that you see and experiment with different types of context and different types of, whether it's retrieval or whether it's more deterministic kind of elements of rules that are sometimes always there. Sometimes we have to then factor out, okay, well, this is never used, but we still have to have it in these three cases. Let's move it out. So we, for example, do we need to trigger memory on every single, for every single system and every single turn? No, we have to be very selective and be relevant. It's like, this is what we think we need. Oh, you mentioned a person. So let's go look up that person's name. Oh, you mentioned a project. Let's go make sure that we looked up when you've mentioned that project recently. And so it's about having the systems and intelligence layer to be able to coordinate those memory systems at the right time.
Nice. That's a great answer. So I've finally just discovered where the Q&A resides, with which button I have to press to bring it up. Apparently I'm not very good at this. So let's now that I have some questions, maybe we can quickly, spend 5 minutes or so kind of addressing them, and then at least a couple of them. So we have one question that is, what kind of evaluations are needed in production environments to assess if the agent is going rogue or stuck in a loop? What kind of monitoring is necessary to address and trace its memory, context, and decisions?
Well, I think you probably have some experience there, so I'd love to have some of your thoughts there. In terms of, I'll share a little bit I'll kind of reiterate a little bit of what I said earlier. It's like, we have custom internal thinking structures that we have, so we know what data thinks it's trying to do, and we can trace those. So when we can see it getting stuck, oh, it's stuck in G again. Shoot, we have to go fix that. Well, there's some rule that there is a flag that's not getting set to allow it to progress the way we expect it to. So if you have those reasoning traces, whether it's thought traces of the model, you can actually see that's inspectable, and making sure that it's inspectable, but also making sure that it's structured, so that in structured ways, so that it's not just free text. That also is a kind of a fundamental principle, I think, to be able to make that debuggable. But I'm also curious, you probably have some additional thoughts there, Josh.
A lot of thoughts. It's a little bit of a tricky question. So I think, in production, so I assume that the question at some level is about So in some ways, guardrailing is harder than observability or sort of production observability. Guardrailing is essentially trying to stop an errant process in flow. The observability, you have time to use smart models and sort of chew on the data set. Stuff doesn't have to happen quite in real time, and still gives you sort of debuggability into what the failure modes are. So, I think that there are, for egregious errors, these are things that an LLM is a judge, capable of ingesting a lot of data, some entire conversation trace, some sort of trace level, conversation telemetry you can capture. And these LLMs are generally quite good at identifying, or classifying common failure modes. Hopefully this isn't happening too commonly. But you also have other proxies, right? You can look at things that raise guardrail errors. You can look at, ideally we get user feedback sometimes when something's gone awry. And that can sometimes be your sort of entry point to investigating a certain mode. Sometimes it's like the human feedback is the hint at like a vein of gold for some infrequent but important failure case. And so, there's a number of techniques. I don't know that all of them we are fielding today, but in our near-term roadmap, we should have coverage for, looking at classifying failure mode types by doing some sort of, unstructured clustering using embeddings of, subtraces and exploring small but common kind of error classes, or surfacing them with evaluator models that are tasked with classifying failure modes in an offline capacity. That was a little ranty. A totally clear answer. There's kind of a lot of stuff there.
A couple quick thoughts there. I think the first one there is, again, having some of that structure so you can actually see those elements and see what the traceability of that is fundamental. For something like safety and guardrails, there's not one solution. There's it's actually defines in depth. It's a whole layer. So there's foundation model guardrails. Then there's before we even get to input, there's like regexes and patterns and things to make sure that the input that's going doesn't have prompt injection attacks and PII. And so before it even hits an LM, we're testing those things. Then further on top of that, we have input guardrails that are maybe like LLMs. And then after that, we have output guardrails as well that are additional kind of LLM driven. And all of those have different operating points of precision and recall. And you're really putting that safety system together overall end to end and making sure that you're measuring each of the component-wise steps on as input and output, but also does that overall aggregate behavior kind of lead to and align with like what the target operating point is that you're looking for. And sometimes very different. A guardrail for something like for legal is going to be very different from one that says just that has legal implications. Is going to be very different from one that has kind of just maybe a policy violation.
I think that's very well put. I think that, the fact that we have magic now in language models doesn't absolve us from system level thinking about the components and, whatever the equivalent now of, unit tests, like sort of, instrumenting each of the known steps with ways of measuring the things that can go wrong. I mean, this goes back to our, previous topic of, out of the box versus customizability. I think, something that is, has risk associated with it is a high value use case. I think you almost necessarily have to think about the details of the components, and build a strategy for capturing and mitigating the kinds of things that might be expected to go wrong in that piece.
But agent systems follow a lot of the same principles as good software. And so, so if you're building a good agent system, then you also need to know some of the best principles of what good software engineering is and best practices. I spent a lot of time at IBM working on logging and tracing in an enterprise application. And if you want to debug some of the really complex WebSphere application, you better have really detailed traces, so that you can understand that behavior. And we do the same thing in agent systems.
So I just glancing across the other questions that we have here, I think we've mostly addressed the topics that were raised. How should we incorporate measurement or evaluation tools and customized agents? I think that's what we're talking about. Would we need custom measurements? I think sometimes. It depends on risk, depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, need custom measurements. And for something like coaching, right, we can, and, you know, we can measure process quality, outcome quality, and whether, you know, if the session was successful. But going back to like the research question, how do we measure a journey? How do we measure a user's journey over time? Is there a coherent plan? Is the user making progress? And is trust being strengthened? All of those different elements are part of what keeps me here, of like working on how do you measure longitudinally kind of change, and that's so that is a form of very, very custom, highly specific, and not just conversation level metric, but system level metric of what we're trying to accomplish in the user's world.
That's great. That's great. I think we wrap here. This has been a really, really stimulating conversation. Yeah, a lot of fun. Thank you very much, Jeff, for sitting and talking to me about this stuff.
And great fun.
You heard about Valence and Nadia. Check them out. And we're Fiddler AI. You know, we'd love to work with you on getting your instrumentation just right on whatever collection of complex agentic and predictive workflows you have. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and you know, have a great day.
Have a great day. Thank you very much.